I've always had an addictive personality, and I really didn't know it until I got into like drugs and alcohol once I got into college. But I was pretty straight laced growing up, went to Catholic church, got the good grades, did sports and stuff. So I think that really helped me not get too deep into addiction. And as soon as high school ended and the sports stopped giving me that validation that I was getting, like I wasn't in the paper anymore, all that external validation, I sought it out through weed. So weed has been my main addiction, and I got sober about 6.5 years ago. And through this journey, I've just noticed that I just have a lot of addictions to a lot of different things. I was like the Hudsman said, alcohol was something I definitely struggled with. I got into nicotine, played around with, had a love affair with Molly, did some Adderall, basically the whole gambit. And today, just grateful to be sober and not dealing with this stuff anymore. I still do have addictions, and I think we're all going to touch on that a little bit, that it's not like a one and done thing. So I struggle right now with addiction to internet technology. So watching streaming movies, YouTube and stuff. And I had a binge actually recently. And so we'll probably touch on this more, just some of the consequences of addiction. And I know whenever I do an addictive thing, the next day I feel kind of out of it. My thinking's cloudy. I feel a lot of guilt and shame. And it's just, every time I do it, it's a reminder that, hey man, there's consequences to your actions, and they're going to be apparent right away. I know you guys talk a lot about this in the dating sphere, is that as men, we see the consequences of our actions immediately. We don't get the luxury to kind of float around them. Although I did for a long time, but now it's like I can't escape it. So that's an addiction I'm working on. And then kind of a weird one is addiction to salt. So salt can be quite addictive. It's I don't know, there's like some Andrew Huberman stuff, he talks about it. And whenever I do, I just fiend it. So those are two addictions I'm working on now, but grateful to be past the other addictions, the ones that were kind of really holding my life back. And so my definition of addiction is just doing something that causes consequences, causes harm to people you care about, to yourself, family members, etc., and just not being able to stop, even though the consequences are so in your face. And there might be that like initial thought that like, of course I can stop, like it's just a substance or whatever. But when actually like it comes time to do it, it's very difficult, and it often takes many tries, other help from other people, and it can just be a confusing thing. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and Sobriety University.
Want to go on the horn, Steve? You up next?
Yeah, my name's Steve. I was an alcoholic, a gambling addict, nicotine addict, salt addict, fast
Sounds
food
like a meeting.
Pretty much. Yeah, have been, used to be addicted to pretty much everything. In some cases, maybe even porn too. Salt, believe it or not, is something I'm addicted to. I don't see it as a bad thing, but just to be a little more common there. My addiction started probably in high school with alcohol. It was more of a validation thing, kind of just going to parties, trying to be the cool kid. I was never really a popular guy growing up. I was great at sports, just like you, Joel. I was in sports. I had a pretty positive outlook in sports, but the lack of social, I don't know what you want to call it, the lack of social proof kind of pushed me. My attention wasn't on the sports, it was on alcohol. I ended up starting chewing tobacco and cigarettes in high school, both, using them kind of erratically, depending on who I was hanging out with. That moved overseas, and that continued my alcohol addiction specifically. And I also did both. I both chewed and smoked at the same time. I still chew. I don't smoke, but smoke cigars, excuse me. So I do use a shitload of nicotine all the time, pretty much all the time. And then when I got back from the military, I was pretty much alone. Most of my family lived overseas, so I moved not only from alcohol and nicotine, but I moved alcohol and nicotine to gambling. I used it as a social crutch, just going to the casino to be around people without having to actually socially interact with people. I had some form of social anxiety I didn't realize until maybe 3 or 4 years into that point. Haven't really done that short of sports betting. I still sports bet, but I don't casino gamble anymore. And I would go through spurts of that for, 14 years? 13 years. I was 21. I'm almost 34 now. So that had been a problem for a while. Never really a porn guy or anything crazy like that, but I guess I'm probably like an OG information addict. I'm constantly consuming information, and I feel real awkward when I don't. I feel like I'm uninformed. And my definition of addiction is doing something unconsciously and not being able to control the impulse when you recognize that you're about to partake in that addiction. And that's if there's an impulse control disorder, essentially.
It's good stuff. All right. I'm actually going to start before I forget on what is addiction. To me, addiction to something is choosing to do something even when you know the consequences, but doing it anyways. Okay? So like when you think about, all right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to drink tonight, even though I got to be up early for a work meeting the next day. And then what do you know? You're either hungover as fuck, you look like shit, or you sleep right through it. Addiction to me is when you have something that will completely consume your time and push away all other responsibilities. I know we all, like, even when we talk about porn, I know that there's many times that people will watch porn and they'll watch porn for far too long. Like, I mean, how long does it take to actually get to the point that you're trying to get to? That takes like 5 minutes. But instead, there you are for an hour and a half. So that's my definition of addiction. And so myself, Huds, as Jaren had mentioned, I am a dating coach. I work with guys. You can find me on IG right over here. If you want to reach out for anything, I do consults and whatnot with people. I've struggled a lot with addiction. I am probably one of the best cases, but worst cases of this. I never really enjoyed hard drugs, but I did, and I still do have problems with alcohol and nicotine. I mean, you'll see, I'll vape a little bit during this stream. And weed as well. It's been all over the place. It's just everything that gives you that excitement, even gambling too. I mean, hell, I can definitely admit that. I love the rush. I hate it, but I love it at the same time. So, thinking back to my story with alcohol, like it got to the point where I actually had to go to an alcohol counselor for a while because I had to seek help in managing it. Now, today, I'm not sober. I still drink here and there with my girl, with other people, with friends. And that's going to be an interesting one, Joel, that I think we're going to enjoy talking about because I'm very much of the mindset of moderation. However, I know a lot of people can't do moderation because addiction is a beast. It is a beast. And if you cannot conquer it, which most people cannot, it's just going to lead you to self-destruction. So that's just kind of my story, a preface, and I'll leave it up to you, Jaren.
All right, cool. I'll bring it on home for the addiction origin stories. I was kind of like Joel in the sense I was a really straight edge kid. Grew up in a small conservative town out in the country, very strict German immigrant grandparents. And I would have never imagined myself in terms of forming my identity at a younger age as someone who would be addicted to anything. And a lot of times you find yourself in these addictive type behaviors and then you're like, oh God, like I ended up being that person. I never would have thought I would be. So I was of the mindset like cigarette, like I thought that I would never smoke cigarettes when I was younger. I was like, oh, it's the grossest thing. I won't put a single one in my body. Whoops, little did I know. And it's kind of like Steve. It's funny, you guys have said a lot of things that resonate with me. So I think we have some themes emerging here. But kind of like Steve, I wasn't the most popular kid, but we covered it on last night's show, which we covered food addiction, which there is a component of food addiction when it comes to being overweight or obese. Or even on the other side of the equation, like bulimia, anorexic type disorders. Those are all kind of, I'd say there's a degree of addictive behavior patterns involved in those. But so when I was in high school, like I just kind of wanted to fit in. I never really thought I was popular. As an adult now, people that knew me in high school, like, dude, everyone liked you. And then I think back, like, oh yeah, like I never got bullied. I never didn't not have friends. I just had a low self-image and low self-esteem. So I didn't realize at the time, it's maybe 14, 15 years of age. I know a lot of my friends started drinking, started smoking weed. Some of them even started getting laid around then. Some of them even younger than that, for heaven forbid. And I was still kind of staunch, like, oh, weed, bad, marijuana, bad, can't do this. And I had a buddy, he seemed really chill. Like he was always kind of wired and kind of got in trouble a lot, but he was always really chill when he smoked. And it was known that he was a pothead at school. And he was one of my best friends, or at least one of the guys I hung out with, I think like freshman, sophomore year. So I remember the first time going to his house and he pulls out a pipe and like there's a little bit in the bowl. And I'm like, I bought into all the propaganda, like reefer madness style, like, oh no, this is going to kill me. And no, pretty much what it did is it just slowed me down. It chilled me out and we watched cartoons and we had a good time. We just laughed all night. So I immediately liked weed when I was a teenager, but I still carried the stigma as far as like, okay, like I'm a good kid. I was usually at or near the top of my class in any sort of subject. I wasn't the best athlete, but I wasn't bad either. I always had a spot on the team. Same with music. I always had a spot in the band. Really, I could just kind of navigate between these groups however I wanted. But my own identity was like, no, I'm a good kid. Again, looking back, I got kicked out of class all the time. I was in detention all the time. I was a couple of years ahead in school, so thank God they sent me to junior college my junior year, and I was working, and they gave me a job on the radio. So they kept me busy. I'm kind of on the hyperactive side too, and that's probably where it really started. They put me on Adderall when I was a kid, which I've mentioned this before. I think that was a terrible thing to do to a child. Like really, ADHD. Yeah, okay, yeah, you might be a little higher thought speed. But really, it's just a lack of attention in your external world. It's because your parents don't give a fuck about you. You know, when it really comes down to it. That's why these kids need that constant attention. My hand would always raise up, and I'd always cut off the teacher, and I was a class clown and all that. So I'd say the core underlying issue that required these substances, or that led me to substances in the first place, it was there at a very young age, and it was very apparent. So the weed thing, did that kind of privately in my bedroom. I'd do it at night, really just to slow me down, and then I'd play guitar and go to sleep. And it was kind of my little secret. I'm sure my family knew because, you know, they grew up in the 70s. My parents, they knew what's up. But I'd smoke out the window and then just kind of chill and just kind of do my own thing. And then in college, I didn't do much weed at all. I did it very seldomly, maybe a couple times a year. At that time, I started working for an internship for a government defense contractor, got a clearance right out of college, walked out of college into a government clearance job. So I spent 15 years or so of just no weed at all. Not that weed is bad, it's just I can't do it. And that's where alcohol comes in the mix. So similar, about 14, 15 years old, I think it was about the first time I drank. I knew that there were alcoholics on both sides of my family. I'd listened to Loveline with Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew all through the 90s. It was syndicated on the West Coast, 10 p.m. That was kind of part of my ritual. And Dr. Drew used to always talk about the alcoholic gene. How do you know you have it? Well, if people are dying on both sides of your family at a very premature age, you probably have it. So I knew better. But the first time I got drunk, of course, like a lot of us do, I got sick. I still can't look at 99 bananas without getting the, in my gut. But even despite being sick the whole next day, I remember I fucking loved it. I felt good. I felt alive for the first time in my life. And then we strung that into a couple nights. My buddy and I and his older brother, old enough to buy us beer, we'd just go to the basement and get fucked up. And we would, and same thing with the weed, we'd laugh and we'd giggle. And although I probably physically preferred weed, there's still such a stigma around it that I kind of kept that hush hush. But at school, like, and really the area I grew up in, if you smoked weed, you're like, oh, you're a loser. Like, you're a skater, you're an emo, you're a goth, you're some sort of fucking weirdo loser. Most of those kids had really bad grades, and I was focused on grades. I'm like, oh, I just kind of falsely assumed that it's gonna hurt me academically if I smoke weed. But with the alcohol, you're cool. Like, if you can fucking hang, you're the cool kid. So I was never what I consider the cool kid in high school. But again, like, I never got openly invited, but I was never turned away. I could go to the cool parties. I hang out with cool kids. I hang out with cool kids from other high schools too. So that started forming a part of my identity. And also, I am very fun when I'm drunk. People really like me. I'm usually pretty introverted in my day-to-day life. I'm very
I don't know, man. You're pretty fun. You're pretty fun all the time. So I don't really know what you're talking about.
Oh, we'll get to that. I'm smoking. So alcohol, that carried on through college. Drunk, pretty much any excuse to get drunk, you do it. And then Started working for the defense contractor, and then the party kind of continues. Like, that's a good old boys club. I worked for one of the big guys. They sent me all over the place, and all those guys got fucked up. And that was the first time I tried cocaine, like 19, 20 years old in Manhattan. They're like, hey, you have a speaking engagement at 8 a.m. It's 5 a.m. as we're rolling in from the strip club. And the 55-year-old senior VP from Dallas, he's like, hey, take a, do this. I'm like, oh no, like that's a bad drug. That's a really bad drug. And then like, dude, just fucking do it. And I did it. And then on stage, sharp, crisp, sweating, and still kind of got from the night before, but it fucking reset the clock. So fortunately, I've never had a cocaine problem. I've used that recreationally. I was in Cancun last week, did a little blow. Prior to that, maybe a year and a half before I used it last. It happens so infrequently, I can't remember. But usually when someone whips out the blow, and if it's someone I've been talking to for a while and we're already having a good conversation, I'm like, all right, like we can take this up to turbo speed. And, bro, business idea, bro. So that kind of energy. Yeah, like they always do that. Within that class of drugs, I've done the Molly, the MDMA. Ecstasy was really big when I first came to college down here in Mexico when I was like 19 or so. But again, I did that seldomly. I never looked for it. If someone had it, I did it. To be honest, I have like most of this shit here in the house, but it's just kind of like I view drugs as tools now. So we'll get to that real quick. But I never really had any problem with coke, amphetamine, any of those class drugs, methamphetamine, any of that stuff. It was really just always alcohol, weed. Weed I took off for like 15 years. Alcohol carried over into my adult life. So when Steve and I met, that was my first job out of college. So rented a big ass house, brought a bunch of old high school buddies in there. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Always turns into a disaster because it was a party house. So I'm trying to like start my career off right, and everyone's getting fucked up every night. We have some dope parties too. So there were many nights it'd be like 6 a.m. I'm sitting at the bottom of the stairs leading to the basement, which is where the parties were at. It's a large unfinished basement, just drinking beer. Like, fuck, I got to go to work. And again, at the time you don't realize it. So that kind of continued throughout my adult life. And then it got to a point like my red pill origin story, which you guys can watch the videos on my channel to see that. I was like 27 or so. And that's like when all the rock stars died. When I finally had that sobering moment, and actually kind of my buddies pulled me aside like, dude, like, what are you fucking doing? You're killing yourself. Like, knock this shit off. And they forced me to go to the gym, and then I sweated out all the booze and the depression. And I was like, oh yeah, like it's nice being jacked because I was in good shape when I was in college. And that kind of got me, okay, I need to renegotiate my relationship with alcohol. So I do it very seldomly now. Again, I was in Cancun last week. I got drunk on the first day because my tolerance was shit. So I only had like 4 whiskeys, but I'm like just messed up. Turns out the second day is usually better. That second day I didn't drink. Third day, I think I had 4 whiskeys, but throughout different points in the day. So, I didn't really bug me too much, and then haven't drank since. And I don't plan on drinking until I'm at a party or until whatever event comes up. But it's usually more social or recreational type use that I use with alcohol. Again, any of your cocaines, your amphetamines, your MDMA, any of that class of drugs, that's all for recreational stuff. I was at EDC a couple of weeks ago. Towards the end of the night, sometimes you need a little tacha or the ecstasy. So that's really popular in Mexico. It's pretty good here. So that's my history there. And then the marijuana thing, I took 15 years off or so during COVID in California. The sheer boredom, I started smoking weed again. But I got really into it in terms of, like, I want to discover the plant, and I want to understand how these various strains affect me, how the terpene profile affects me, how THC versus like CBD affects me. So I was saying the pre-call, I prefer lower THC. I've got a like Jack Herrera pen right here. I think this one's diluted, so it's like 7 or 8, but it's like high CBD and high. The terpene I like is limousine, which makes you kind of more social, more outgoing, like you said, fun. So thank you, I appreciate it. I was doing numbers all day, so I was bored with myself at that point. But I use weed mostly as a tool, not to get fucked up. Like, yes, there's usually gonna be some THC, but I try to go on the lower end and then look for other properties in the plants that give me other tertiary or secondary type benefits. And my definition of addiction is really just anything that gives you a dopamine release that creates those ingrains in your brain to where you need that stimuli or more to receive a similar effect. And the hard part about that is the more as you get into it, like I said, my first day drinking in Cancun, messed up off of 4 drinks. The second day, if I wanted to go at it, I probably could have drank all day and not had a problem. So your body is very, very flexible and very adaptable. So your brain will create these neural pathways to where it needs this substance, and it takes more to get that initial hit. And then you get to the point where even as you do more, you don't get that initial hit anymore. And when you really find, so like when I find myself addicted, which I'll find myself sneaking up too high in the THC content sometimes. When I go to California, all my friends smoke, and that shit is potent up there. They'll wake up, and entrepreneur type guys wake up, smoke a full J before breakfast, and be on the day. And I'm sitting on the couch just buzzing, just like whoa. And then I come back to Mexico, and my little watered down weed doesn't do shit for me. It's like I need it to feel normal, to not feel shitty, and that's when you know you're addicted. So for me, it's whenever that brain mechanism or process engages to where it's like, okay, we're now accustomed to this outside substance or stimuli. It could be behavioral, it could be porn, could be gambling. For me, guys, I talk about game a lot on my channel. Like sometimes you go on spurts to where all the pussy kind of feels the same, and every girl, it's like kind of like you're just masturbating in a warm body, and then you get to that point like, okay, like there is a sex addiction component, or you need more and more. You're like choking her, slapping, spitting, pulling her hair, and like the girl's like, hey, I was a virgin like a year ago, and she's terrified. She doesn't know what the fuck's going on. So that's where you got to be like, all right, boom, boom, pull back the reins a bit, and like, I'm a little too far into this. Let's either back off, taper off, which you reduce frequency or the intensity, or just go cold turkey. And I'm pretty disciplined internally. My internal structures are very concrete and disciplined. So usually I just go cold turkey. I'm gonna feel like shit for a day or two, and then just get that get the necessity for that stimuli or the stimuli out of your system. So that's my take on addiction.